Hey Roosters, and welcome back to another episode of Making My Own TCG. Today's episode we're going to solidify some of the rules for the game, even if only on a shallow level, to get you guys at a better understanding of how the game currently is played right now. Let's get right into it. When I start teaching somebody a TCG, which is kind of what I'm doing to you guys right now, I want to start with two things in particular. First off, how you win the game, because it makes a lot of things more clear as I start talking about them and to get to a better understanding of what's going on. And the second thing is the card types, and that's when you really get into how the game is played. How do you win this game? Your goal is to deal damage, or rather, deal your opponent damage to their health, their player life, equal to their character's their chosen frame stamina. Frame is a card type we're about to talk about in just a moment. Point is, every frame has a certain amount of health, you can call it. We'll call it that for the video. Stamina I believe, is going to be the official term. And once you deal that much damage to their stamina, they lose the game. It's very simple. But how you deal damage to stamina is a little bit more unique compared to other card games out there. On to the card types. Right now, the game has five distinct card types. Two of which are very similar to each other. We'll start with the frame since I mentioned it earlier. Your frame is essentially your character card. It will have your stamina, that's how much damage you can take before you lose the game, but also sort of a resource in this game. It has a name, it has a couple keywords, a couple attributes, and that sort of thing, and an effect. And then, of course, it's going to have, or not of course, but rather it's going to have a beast cost, as I call it right now. And once you take damage equal to this number, you can transform into your beast form, and it's going to give you a power up, and it's going to make you a little bit more powerful. And hopefully it's going to help you win the game, or make a comeback, or something like that. Your beast form is very similar to your frame. It's the second card game in the game, which is essentially another type of the frame, but it does have a couple of unique things. Usually their abilities will be a bit stronger, but instead of having a beast cost, now they have something I call right now a balance modifier. And what I said earlier in the previous video, if you guys weren't there, and I talk about a lot throughout this entire series, is that this game has throughout the entire series, I talk about me wanting my game to have a balancing mechanic. Right now, it just takes the place of two separate resources that you sort of have to manage, in a sense. The point is, they have something called a balance modifier, and usually that means they're going to artificially enhance one of the two resources that you have, which can be a benefit, but it also can be a negative if you don't keep it in control. Another thing I want to say about the beast forms is, as we play right now, you don't have to transform. The abilities are a little bit stronger, and they give you small buffs, but they also give you small negatives, and sometimes you may not want to take on that negative, depending on what type of deck you're building. And they also give you a small stamina boost, and that doesn't mean that your life actually changes, but rather you can actually use them as a resource to pay for different abilities. The third card type is one of the most important. Those are your stance cards. I really have to do a lot of explaining to explain how a stance card works, but essentially each player will have a stance card, and some stance cards will be better against other stance cards. In fact, they all have a sort of Pokemon type tree or wheel of advantages and disadvantages against the other stance types, and your opponent's stance might be better than against your stance. And so another big part of this game right now is that you have to sort of maneuver around and change stances to hopefully gain the edge and the advantage over your opponent. It isn't static. It doesn't matter what attacks you're playing, what characters you're using, this stances, but you do have to keep watch on it, because if you allow your opponent to get the advantage on you or gain an advantage stance over your stance, it can become a really big problem and will most definitely lead to you losing the game. Stances also have abilities which will help certain play tiles or deck types, but mostly the main important thing about them is their stance zones and how they interact with other stance zones, especially your opponents. What I really like about this mechanic is that it gets even wilder in multiplayer games. If there's 4 people on the field, or 4 people playing the game at the same time, you don't have to worry about your stance against your opponents, but also other people around you, and it sort of brings a level of tension to the game, knowing that if I want to beat this one player, if I want to be better against him, I might have to sacrifice and be worse against this guy, and it's a really good, I felt that it's a really fun way that works. The way it pans out is really interesting and really intriguing to me. The fourth card type is going to be one of your main card types in your deck, and those are going to be your sprites. The way the sprites works is they're sort of creatures, in lore-wise, they're creatures that power your frame, your mech suit, or the robot, right? That's sort of your power source. And the way they work is that you play them onto the field, and you have 3 sprite zones. You have your front, your attack booster, and your defense booster. and your sprite in the front zone is going to contribute its power icon to the fight. And your sprite in the defense zone will take its support power and add that to your defense, and the one in your attack zone is going to take its support power and add that to your attacks. And essentially, these sprites are going to create the basic stats for your attacks every turn. So during your turn, at the end of your turn, you can choose to attack with your basic sprite powers, and that will mean the power of that attack will be your sprite's power. The attack boost will be your support on the attack side, and the defense being the support on the defense side. Now, this will make a whole lot more sense when I get into explaining combat, but right now, these are the important numbers you want to keep in mind when looking at the card. Sprites also have a stamina, which means they can take a certain amount of damage for you before they get discarded, if you choose to make them do that, in fact, they have to take the damage. Actually, that was an old ruling that you can choose, but right now, the way we have right now is that they are forced to take damage for you, and when they do, they go away. And as they take damage, they also rotate and become weaker. And so basically, the more damage, the more exhausted they get, the weaker they get until they go away. And they take damage for you, but you can also use them to play for cost, just like you could use your actual health points to pay for cost. And again, I'll explain that a little bit later once we get through all the card types. But point is, they also have a stamina upkeep cost, which is not the stamina cost it takes to play them, but right now it's the stamina cost that it takes to keep them in play. I might change that later if it becomes too annoying or too troublesome, especially since you also have to keep track of the stamina on your sprites themselves. It might end up being changed, but right now, instead of it being a cost to play them, but it's rather a cost to keep them in play. The importance of having the cost to keep them in play instead of the cost to play them is because it actually makes you wonder if you want to just play all the sprites turn one or the first turn of the game, and it encourages you to want to change out your sprites at some point, because maybe their cost to keep them into play is not worth keeping them around, especially at whatever state of the game you're in. But I think I might change that now that I say it out loud and try to explain it. I think it would make more sense if the stamina cost to play them would essentially just be the stamina cost to play them. The fifth card type is your action cards, and they work very simply. They're one-shot effects. You play them, you pay their stamina cost, they go to your discard pile. You can incidentally also use them. A lot of them have artificial attacks and defenses you can use. So if you're being attacked, you can play an action card in your hand, of course paying its stamina cost to defend the attack for you. Or if during your turn you don't want to attack with your sprites, you can attack with your action card, and it will do the attack for you, and then you won't have to exhaust your sprites to do the attack. Now that I said a lot of different words, I probably didn't explain this very well to everybody, but that's not really the point of today's video. It's sort of just to get the ideas out there, and we'll go from there. But anyway, let's talk about how the entire game will shake down. We'll go over through a sample turn. We'll give you a look at the board state as well. First off, let's start with the board state. You're setting up your game, right? You have your pile for your deck, your discard pile, and then your stamina zone. That's where your stamina cards are going to go. You're also going to have 3 zones for your sprites. The center zone being usually going to be the most important, and your 2 support zones. You're going to have your 2 energy zones for your, as they're called right now, light and dark energy, but I do really want to change the terminology. It seems a little generic, and it doesn't really fit the story that I'm telling right now. But anyway, your light and your dark energy zones as well. And then finally, you're going to have your damage zone at the very back. And when you take damage, that's where the cards are going to go, so you know that you have taken that certain amount of damage. And that's what the field's going to look like right now, as the game is currently. Okay, starting the game. At the start of the game, you shuffle up your deck, right? You put in your deck zone. Then you're going to draw a starting hand of 4 cards from it. Both players are going to do this. Then you're going to set your stamina zone. I am going to have a mulligan system. I don't know how it's going to work right now, but generally it's going to be set the cards you don't want to side, draw up, and then shuffle the old cards back in. But anyway, then you set up your stamina. You take 3 cards from the top of your deck and put it into your stamina zone. And your stamina zone is a resource, but it's also a defensive life mechanic. If you were to take damage as a player, not as a sprite, if your player was to take damage, you then have to discard cards from your stamina zone to soak that damage, right? Or you can choose to, rather. You can just choose to discard your stamina cards, just soak that damage, and essentially it's going to keep you alive longer, because generally you only have 5 health points, and it's not that hard to do damage. You're going to want to lose some resources to gain some health, essentially, to negate the damage by taking it in the form of resources instead. But you can also spend them on stuff, and that's really important. You can also discard your stamina cards to spend them. You start the game with 3 stamina cards from the top of your deck. Then, even the first player is going to draw a card to start their turn, and you're going to gain a stamina to start your turn. And that's going to generally be the flow of the game as it goes through. Stamina is a hard resource to come by. You don't get a lot of it, but it isn't a finite amount because you can spend it, and that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get it back. And also, as the game continues, the game does have a sort of reshuffling mechanic. If your deck runs out, it's going to be a really pretty smart deck, you do reshuffle. But after your first reshuffle, the way we play it now is that you don't get any new stamina cards. Why is that important? Because it means the game does have a sense of, well, it's not just about running out of cards, but it's about running out of stamina. And you don't want to run out of stamina. That's what's more important than running out of cards. You can keep the cards and you can try to play a game if you still have more stamina left. But once you run out of stamina, you're done with stamina. And usually that means you lose the game. But anyway, after that, you can play cards from your hand, that being sprites or action cards. The important thing is you can only attack once during your turn, that be with an action card or with the sprites that you played onto the field. And now I'm going to explain combat, which isn't all that complicated, but it does have some complicated elements to it. Okay, so this is how it works. Combat. If you're choosing to attack with a sprite, you would then exhaust your main sprite and declare the attack. Your power value on your main sprite will be the attack value, and if your opponent chooses to defend with their sprite, then they will also exhaust their sprite, and the power value on their sprite will be their defense value. You minus the defense from the attack, the excess damage goes to your opponent's stamina, and if they don't have any stamina, or if they don't choose to spend their stamina, they reveal the top card of their deck and put it into their damage zone. Simple. Where does it get complicated? Your boost values. Your 2 support sprites, or your 2 will create your 2 support values, your attack boost and your defense boost. If you're attacking, you can then exhaust your support sprite to add its support attack boost to your attack, and if you're defending, you can do the same, vice versa. Now, when you're playing action cards, they will have a artificial attack power, attack boost, and defense boost values printed on the card, and so if you were to play it from your hand, you spend the stamina to play it normally. If you want to boost it, you spend more stamina to activate its attack boost or its defense boost, so on and so forth. Spending stamina is very cautiously done because, again, it's health as much as it's attack. You can gain 2 attack from spending a stamina, but you can also take, essentially that's 1 extra damage you wouldn't even be able to prevent it by exhausting 2, so on and so forth. So you have to play that sort of game. Are you going to go on the aggressive? Are you going to spend the stamina to get whatever the attack boost is? Or are you going to take the damage? Or you're not going to get that boost, knowing that maybe later on you're going to want to use that stamina as health, essentially, or as defensive abilities, essentially. And that's currently the way the game works. It's very simple. You just keep going back and forth, drawing cards, gaining stamina, attacking, trying to gain advantages by switching up your stances. Because, okay, oh crap, I almost forgot how to explain that. Stances, of course. How do stances work? Let's talk about that really quickly. Okay, so this is how stances work. Every stance card, and you're going to have multiple, you're going to have a deck of 4 stance cards that you're going to be able to maneuver through. Every stance card has a main stance type, and a type that it's good against, a type that it's bad against, and a type that it is like they nullify each other. These 2 types nullify each other. So if I'm using my jungle stance, as they're called right now, and you're using your mountain stance, then we nullify each other. Is it really makes any sense lore-wise? But that's just the way it works. We nullify each other. As such, I can't attack you, you can't attack me, as long as we're both on these 2 stances. But if you switch to a stance that's good against me, like say desert, I think is good against jungle as it is now, then all of a sudden, all your attacks, all your defenses against me cost 1 stamina less to perform. And that whether it means that you have to exhaust your sprite 1 less time to do it, or you have to, or that means you have to, of course, if it's an attack card, pay 1 less stamina to play it. And if your thing is also good against me, there's also a negative side of that as well. because that means all my attacks against you and all my defense against you get -1 power. So not only do you get to save stamina, but you make me weaker in the sense as well as you have advantage and I have disadvantage. So there's a lot of cards in the game that allow you to maneuver, which means you just switch out your stances. You just choose a different stance from your stance deck and you remove it. And playing around with that concept throughout the game can really lead to victories, because obviously stamina is a big resource in the game. Power is a big thing. If you're able to manipulate the stances in your favor, then you'll be able to catch your opponent on it. You're going to be able to gain a big advantage in the game. And so it's not just about swinging attacks back and forth. A lot of times you have to stop swinging attacks to say, I want to try to gain an advantage over my opponent. Because with other than card effects, there's only one other way to change your stance, and that is by using your so-called attack for the turn. You can decide not to attack to change your stance instead. And that's going to mean that obviously you lose a chance to get ahead in the game, but it's a short-term risk for a long-term possible reward. And your opponent can turn around and do the same thing. Say, I'm not going to attack, I'm going to switch my chance to something that's good against the stance you just changed into. But then that's where the game comes into play. And generally, it's not a very positive exchange to keep going back and forth like that. So if you're somebody who wants to win that exchange, you're going to have to build your deck in a way that allows you to do that. And the way it is right now, there's a lot of cards, or a lot of game plans are going to focus on trying to win the stance race. Now, there is a secondary resource mechanic to the game as it is now, and that is your light and your dark resource zones that I mentioned earlier on. The two zones you have to balance. The way it essentially works, it's not that complicated, but cards will tell you to put a card into your dark zone or a card into your light zone, or as a light material or as a dark material. At the end of every one of your turns, after you make your attacks, you're going to sort of balance check. And the way this works right now is that for every dark energy you have, you'll put a card from your hand into your stamina zone, and that will gain you more stamina, but you'll lose cards from your hands. And if you have, for every light energy you have, you'll take a card from your stamina and draw it into your hand. So what does this generally mean for you? It means if you have an equal amount of both, you'll put cards from your hand into your stamina, and you'll take them back out again. And if you have more light than you have dark, then you're going to gain cards but lose stamina. If you have more dark than light, you're going to lose cards but gain stamina. And generally what this is going to mean is you can choose to have more cards in your hand, gain that advantage, or you can choose to have the stamina advantage, or you can simply choose to just cancel each other out and not worry about it at all by balancing the amount of light and dark. I also have many mechanics in the game that literally want you to have both the equal amount of dark and light resources to gain even more powerful effects, which gives you a bigger incentive to try to have an equal amount of both of them. But there are also a lot of effects that sort of just want you to have one or the other, and it's up to you to choose which one or which path, which route you're going to go down in the end. That's the way it is right now. I am completely open to changing that simply because I do want to explore other options for this particular mechanic. I'm not completely happy with it as it is now, but I'm happy enough to say that this is the way it's going to be unless I come up with a better idea later on. And that's pretty much all there is. It was definitely a light overview. I didn't get into the nitty-gritty. There's a lot more that I probably would need to explain if I were trying to teach this to the game proper, but as the game's still in early development, this is essentially all there is right now to play around. You make an attack every turn, you gain your stamina, you draw your cards, you manage your light and your dark energy, you play down sprites, and yeah, that's kind of the game as it is now. It is open to change. I'd love to hear you guys' ideas. Shout out to everybody who's given me ideas in the past. I like them a lot. Some of them I tested out, some of them I didn't. Some of them are in the current version of the game. So I'm so glad everybody who commented and gave ideas. Thank you so much. Do it again, do it more. It's going to help this game move along quite nicely, hopefully to a timely finish. That's all for today's video. Come back next week for another update, another video, and another installment into this series of making my own TCG.
Well, that's going to be all for now, but if you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you guys go ahead and watch some of our other videos that we've made on this channel. Also, give this video a like if you thoroughly enjoyed it. And of course, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of our future content. And I hope to see you guys back at the Roost.